You all may call me Matt when you address me. If you have any questions, um, the doctor part can get dropped. We can be a little bit informal tonight. Um, and thank you all for coming or coming virtually and for caring about turtles. You're here because you are interested at least, and possibly because you are thinking about ways that you can help turtles and learn more about them so that you can sort of give them a better shot in the world. I want to, before I get started on any part of the presentation, thank some of my colleagues in the Virginia Herpetological Society. Caroline Seitz, who's our education officer, she's done a phenomenal job at organizing things like this. And I cannot say how much I thank her for putting together slides, putting together presentations for us. John White runs our website, and I'm going to use the website a little bit tonight. So I'll toggle a little bit back and forth between the website, the state website, and then I've also got a webcam set up over here, and I'll show you hopefully some specimens, and maybe if we're lucky, I'll get one of my a live turtle to cooperate with me tonight. So we'll go ahead and get started. Again, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, or I can pause periodically and take questions as needed. And if you need me to slow down, I can slow down. Really, three main things that I want you all to take away from tonight. One is just sort of the basics of turtles. Two, looking at some of the turtles that are local to your area. So we could talk for hours about all the turtles in Virginia, all their biology, their really weird and interesting things about them. But I really want you to be able to identify turtles to enjoy going out on the marsh or going visiting and being able to spot them maybe through binoculars, or if you happen to see them crossing a road, knowing which species you're seeing as it crosses the road. And then the third thing is mainly ways that you can get involved. And there's lots of things that you can do that don't require you to ever touch a turtle, that don't require you to spend hours out sweating in the hot, marshy habitat that you can do even from home. So we'll talk a little bit about that tonight, and hopefully I'll have enough time for questions even at the end. So to start out, what is a turtle? So we know that turtles are obviously reptiles, so they are going to have scaled skin, and they're going to be a relative of things like snakes, lizards, crocodilians, and then there are these lizard-like reptiles called tuataras that are endemic to some islands over in the over out in the Pacific. And Reptilia is a group that includes these scaled ectothermic vertebrate animals. So they all have backbones, but they are going to be very different than mammals in the sense that they are regulating their body temperature and conditions mostly by behaviorally moving through the environment. They cannot maintain their internal temperature, very different from the outside temperature. And that's why we might actually see them at different times of year. So for instance, in the winter, you're not going to see them out and about because they really cannot have their bodies be the same temperature as the outside temperature and actually do things like foraging and reproduction. So turtles are ectothermic or cold-blooded, as some people say, and they are in fact vertebrates. So what most people know about turtles is that they have a shell, right? So that's kind of what most people have seen about them and know about them. In fact, they actually have two shells. So they actually have a part that is on the back or the dorsal side called the carapace. And then they have a part that covers the ventral side or the belly area and chest called the plastron. And those features are unique to this group. So while all reptiles have scaly skin and are ectothermic, it's only the turtles that have this really highly armored shell. That makes them quite unique, and it's been that way for well over 200 million years of turtle history. So one thing that a lot of people are confused about too with turtles is that they cannot depart from their shell at all. So they're not like a hermit crab or some of the other crustaceans that are able to move from one shell to another as they grow. The shell grows with the turtle and it's a part of their skeleton. So in this image that you see down at the bottom of the screen, you can see that the bone part of the turtle skeleton is very tightly fused and very much a part of the rest of the skeleton. That dorsal part, that carapace, is going to be the ribs and then plates of bone that lie under or on top of the ribs and the vertebral column, right? The ventral side is what is our sternum. So that's part of their sternum, and then those scutes or plates that are going to be underlying that part of their skin. So it's very, very well armored, and they are unable to depart from that. So it's all interconnected. Turtles are important ecologically. So we don't fully appreciate them, and because they are absent for a large part of the year, we don't see them at all. And because we actually know relatively little about what turtles do on a day-to-day basis. So for most species, we are still trying to figure out exactly how they eat, what they eat, when they forage, when they mate. And so because of that, there's just a lot of information that's kind of missing from some species. Now, there are some species that we know a lot about because they've been really well studied. And what we know about those species is in the environments that they're in, they tend to play really important roles ecologically. So they are great because many of the species are either carnivorous or omnivorous. And so they're going to eat things like invertebrates, or they'll eat other vertebrate species. And some turtles even have the ability to modify their environment. So because many of them are burrowing species, so they build nests, some of them actually go and will estivate or overwinter in burrows. They actually modify the abiotic environment around them. And that creates habitat for other species. So more than just what they eat and where they fit on the food web, but also the fact that they actually can modify the environment to create habitat. That's a really important role. And we only really have begun to understand that in a few species, that sort of foundational role that they play. Turtle eggs are going to be obviously an important part of other organisms' diet. So they're both predators and prey in many environments, and not just the eggs, but the hatchlings. Turtles have a relatively low survivorship in those first couple of years because they're relatively easy for things like birds of prey and mammals that tend to feed on things that are small and easily obtained. And so they provide that for other organisms that provide that ecological service. We know that as humans, like there's a fascination with these tanks. They're kind of walking around. They're very they appear in cartoons. They're slow, and so they are a sense of wonder and amazement for people. And so that sort of ecosystem service of just sort of a cultural experience is a really important part of the human experience. And that's one of the things that I think is really cool about them. And so, they are one of the species that people often say like they're like a living dinosaur. So most of these species, their lineage goes back to about just over 200 million years, and that armored skeleton has come with them the entire time, right? So that in fact, that unique feature of all turtles really that defines that group sort of has earned them some respect as being sort of relatively similar to what they would have looked like many years ago. Turtles, as armored as they are, have a lot of things that they have to deal with on a daily basis. Here in the United States, actually worldwide, the turtle trade has waxed and waned throughout history. So turtles for human populations have been an important source of food. They've also been sort of a source of cultural significance, sort of as like trinkets or talisman type of ornaments, and then also a status symbol. And that's one of the things we kind of deal with now is illegal poaching. Sometimes it's just because someone wants to have this really rare turtle that they paid thousands of dollars for, and so they are poached for that reason as well. On top of that, really, another currently being addressed issue is the prevalence of diseases. So we know that turtles are just like every other animal on the planet, and they have sort of these epidemic diseases that pop up in populations. In some cases, those just live with the population and they're fine. But in other cases, we've actually seen declines of turtles all over the globe. And then we have these diseases that are actually kind of like more pandemic, where once it creeps up in one population, it can actually jump from population to population and species to species. So rhinovirus is one that we mentioned here. There's a lot of other diseases that we know are capable of crossing between both populations as well as between species, even groups of organisms. So you could have a rhinovirus in a frog, and it could actually, rhinovirus is capable of moving from frogs over to reptiles. And we do have infections that have been shown in turtles. That third bullet point, though, is the number one cause of most of the declines. It's habitat loss and fragmentation. And that is one thing that we know has the most effect on these animals, but it is the one that is the hardest to study, in the sense that anytime you look at the effects of habitat loss, you're essentially studying the effects of humans, human interactions. So when we clear cut forests, when we fill in marshes, when we build roads, those all have the effect of fragmenting the habitat that turtles have to cross. And as a result of that, we have seen turtle populations both all sort of in a broad area decline, as well as in really localized populations decline, largely because of that habitat loss. So I do have a question. I'm going to go ahead and take it. So do invasive or introduced turtle species pose a significant threat to the native ones? And the answer is absolutely. So invasive species are going to be ones that are capable of coexisting with our native populations, and they tend to also outcompete native populations. And we know on one end the competition effect of the turtles. We also know that some of these invasive species bring with them pathogens that they are resistant to in the wild, but that our native populations are not resistant to. So if they bring the pathogen with them, they're doing fine, but our turtles actually can potentially suffer as a result of that.
And Matt, we have a couple other questions in the chat. The first one is, can you describe the habitat that turtles need? And I realize that that may be in your slides.
We're going to get there.
Okay, so the next one is, since shells stay with the turtle throughout their lifetime, do the patterns of box turtles remain relatively unchanged so that they can be used for individual identification?
That is a great question. And that's from Susan. So turtles have unique patterns. And you can take a photo of a turtle, and as long as it is a scaled photograph and in the correct orientation, so try not to make try to make sure that's not at a weird angle. If you capture that pattern, you can actually compare it from year to year. So Dr. Kevin Hammond at Virginia Tech, has studied that in using computer software to help to identify turtle species or turtle individuals from one to another. That's a great question. So even as they grow, their patterns stick with them, and you can kind of keep track of them that way. I have a turtle in my yard. She visits usually once or twice a year. She comes to the yard, and I've gotten the same turtle for about 4 years now. And I don't know if she's nesting nearby, but she likes to travel through my yard as a result of that. So great question. All right, I'm going to move on. So what protections do turtles have, right? I identified 2 areas that I think are the biggest kind of umbrella protection. So one is the Endangered Species Act, which is a federal it's federal legislation. And what that allows us to do as a state is to regulate or have the agencies at least enforce species that have been deemed as critically endangered or threatened, and to provide the states with some guidance as far as how to enforce those or enact the Endangered Species Act. So some species are listed. Here in the state of Virginia, we don't have many, but an example would be the bog turtle, which would not be found in Dyke Marsh, but it would be found nearby. There's populations up in northern Maryland, and those are protected federally. And the states have the ability to go in and, they could, if you were found with one in your possession, I don't know what the current negative consequences are, but it's not good. And they will confiscate those. And the states have the ability to kind of work within that act, and work with the Fish and Wildlife Service to sort of enforce it. In Virginia, one of the things I really like about our Commonwealth is that we actually also have this program called the Species of Greatest Conservation Need. And so the DWR, the Department of Wildlife Resources, deems certain habitats, certain species as having habitat guidelines that are relatively specific to a species, and sort of ensuring that those populations that live in that area can thrive. And so they've determined that there are species that have sort of a least amount of conservation need and a most amount of conservation need. So a species that might be a tier 1 species, that's actually relatively high. That is the highest level, and those species really need protections of their habitat, not just the animals, but the actual habitats need to be preserved. And then tier 4 is least of those 4 tiers, but still those species that are on tier 4, they need some habitat protection, or they're species that we don't know a lot about. And so we actually need to do more research to understand kind of what they need in order to survive. So yeah, so I often get the question at the end of the talk, how can I help turtles? So I like this. I thought this was great that Caroline put it here in the slide in the beginning, at least. So one thing that I always tell people is, if you see a turtle in the wild, leave it in the wild. They do not, wild turtles don't make great pets. Turtles exhibit something called eyesight fidelity. And what that means is that they're going to go back, try to find their home for the rest of their life. So if you take one out of its habitat and you relocate it, it will spend a majority of its time trying to rehome, and trying to find home, figure out where it is and how to get back there. The other problem is that when you take a turtle out of its habitat, and let's say that you were to keep it at home in a pond or in an aquarium, it then kind of has the ability to culture any bacterial infections that it might have. And those can cause problems if you actually were to take it back to where you got it from. So in Virginia, if you were to take a turtle, you're not supposed to actually relocate it or put it back where you found it if you've kept it for more, I believe, than 7 days in captivity. So don't just keep them where they are. Don't keep them as pets. They're not great pets in general, and don't relocate them. So there are people who are sort of specialized relocators and animal rehabilitators, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. But definitely don't feel that you have the need to relocate animals that you think are in danger because of, say, habitat development or redevelopment. Contact the agencies that are responsible for that and kind of leave them where they are for the time. If you do have a pet turtle, please don't release it into the wild. That was a great question asked about invasive species. So we have a lot of species that do fairly well in North America and fairly well in our area in Virginia that are not going to be great for the environment. And if you release your pet into the environment, it carries with it pathogens or disease. It also carries with it the potential to outcompete other things that are already there. We'll get to the turtle crossing the road in a minute. For those of you who have yards, we do recommend using native plants for landscapes. Turtles many species are herbivorous and will oftentimes also eat the invertebrates that would eat native plants, usually native invertebrates. So it's kind of a good thing to have native plants, reducing your pesticide use. And then if you can leave part of your yard without violating HOA guidelines, you can leave it as wild as possible. And sometimes they show up. So I keep a part of my yard that's not managed or mowed in particular. And that's where my annual turtle shows up, my little box turtle. All right, I have a whole slide on that question about the turtle crossing the road. So if you do see a turtle crossing the road, that is an instance where you can relocate, but not very far. So don't carry it up the road 2 miles or 3 miles and release it in the nearest farm. What you only want to do is help it to get across the road, especially if you think that there is a very high likelihood that it's going to get run over. And so the first thing you want to do is always make sure that you are safe. There are many instances of herpetologists that have been hit by cars because they were trying to help an animal and didn't really pay attention to traffic. So make sure it's safe for you to get it across. And then you can support that turtle with both hands. You always want to be behind the turtle's head. You never want to have it facing you. Even if it's a small turtle, it can bite you. And you want to have the turtle facing in the direction that it was going. Don't take it across where it's coming from because it will just run back out over the road. And then one thing I should mention is that all turtles, in theory, have the potential to carry salmonella. It's a part of their normal biotic environment, their microbiota. And so always make sure you have a way to wash your hands or wash them as soon as possible after you handle them, because you don't know what you picked up off of them. And salmonella is just one of many bacterial infections. So Susan had another question about fenced yards need a turtle escape. And the answer is yes. They have to have a way to get in and out of your yard. And so my fence, I have about a 8-inch, the lowest bar on my fence is about 8 inches. And so they get to move in and out under that area. If you have a spot on your fence that they can get through anywhere, it's better than not being able to get through at all. And so they'll oftentimes use edges to migrate around your yard, and they can find their way out that way. So I guess any kind of hole would be good. Just make sure, some of these species are pretty big. So if you, for instance, get snapping turtles that come in your yard, they can get fairly large and they grow. And I'll show you one here in a minute, or I'll show you a shell in a minute of one that's fully grown. And just make sure you give them enough space if that's something that you really are interested in, kind of letting them migrate through your yard. Now for sick or injured turtles, those are ones that I do think it's worth collecting and finding a wildlife rehabilitator to help you deal with the problem. So we have several wildlife rehabilitation centers throughout the Commonwealth. You may have to drive a ways to get to them. So you want to place that turtle in a container. You want to get it, off of wherever you're finding it safely. And then usually what I do with the wildlife centers is I'll take pictures of them and I'll send them to the wildlife center before I drive all the way there. Or I'll give them a phone call and say, hey, I noticed there's a turtle. It's got a bulging eye. It's really red and inflamed. Do you guys are you interested in seeing it? And most of the native species, they all want to see it, and we end up figuring out a way to get the animal to them. If worst case scenario, you might just have to contact a veterinarian. And there are certified wildlife rehabilitators that are listed with the DWR. And I'll show you that website in a little bit. So can you identify a turtle by its eye? So we'll talk about turtle IDs here on the second half of the presentation. I'll get to that question in a minute. In fact, before I go, let me just, I'm going to toggle off here and go to my tab farm and show you the DWRs. Let's see, I'm going to stop sharing for just a second. And I'm going to migrate over to the DWR's wildlife rehabilitator list just to show you how that works.
I can put that in the chat for you too. We have a few other questions in the chat as well while you're looking.
Yeah.
Can I give you one of them?
Sure.
So defensed yards need a turtle escape.
Yeah,
And
that was one I answered.
and
Yes.
what and then what can you let's see. They have a couple of box turtles. We have them in a completely enclosed area. So this is also about working in danger of spreading diseases to the wild turtles. We had another question about that earlier too.
Yeah, box turtles need to really be in physical contact with each other. So if you're keeping them and they're in an enclosed area, they can dig, so they can get out. If you don't have it, the fence is deep enough. Um, they're not going to, as long as they can't escape, they're not going to have a high chance of getting things out. There are some respiratory viruses, and actually there's a couple of fungal and bacterial pathogens that can get out through the air, but they would have to be pretty close together to make that happen. So can you guys see this? Am I sharing it now? So this is the DWR's website for licensed wildlife rehabilitators. And what this allows you to do is you can go down and select a location based on which county you're a part of. And so let's just say we happen to be in Arlington, and we're interested in finding a wildlife rehabilitator in Arlington. We can do the list, and then Barbara Farley would be the person to contact at Long Branch Nature Center, who is a certified wildlife rehabilitator. And so this is a really helpful tool for a quick reference. So they do keep it up to date, or they're supposed to keep it up to date. And most of the counties, well, a number of the counties have a reptile person. Not all of them do. And you may have to go over a county to find somebody who's a certified wildlife rehabilitator. So in the instance that you don't have one of those facilities, like the Southwest Virginia Wildlife Rehab Center, or the let's see, the one that's up in can't think of my list offhand, but if you don't have one of those near you, you may actually have one of those certified folks nearby. So I do want to take this question before I move on. So Mary C asked, how and or when does a turtle decide where their home is? That is a great question that we do not have the answer to. So what we do know is that turtles have high site fidelity. They will revisit, or they'll spend a lot of their time in the same kind of places. And their home range is kind of defined, we think, by their own size, as well as how far they've migrated from their nesting site. And so they're obviously not going to travel too far from their nesting site throughout their life. But if you think about it, as the nests kind of move around, the population can actually have a fairly wide range of related individuals. But the individual turtle is going to always kind of be within some proximity of its own nest site, wherever it hatched from. Now, the sea turtles are a completely different story, and there's a lot of unknowns when it comes to how sea turtles migrate away from the shore and end up, thousands of miles away from home. Or should I say thousands of miles from their nesting habitat. It's a good question, though. That homing behavior is very hard to study. So it involves marking the turtles after they hatch and then basically following them for a large part of their lives, which is very hard to do for little turtles. All right. All right, so some helpful turtle terminology. So if you are trying to identify turtles, and if you are looking at any field guides or the VHS website, there's going to be a bunch of terminology. This is your homework. We can't go through all of this tonight, and you're not going to be an expert tonight, but this is to give you an idea or a feel for how to get started on this.
We only see the rehab site,
Oh
not
no,
your
here we go.
slides.
Let me switch it. Let's see. I'll stop share. Sorry about that. There we go. Helpful turtle terminology. So, so with your turtles, most of you, I would imagine, are going to see them probably from a distance. I highly recommend investing in a pair of binoculars if you are intending to go out looking for turtles on the marsh. That's going to be the easiest way to spot them because they will run from you or they'll dive into the water as you're trying to approach them. And so learning how to identify them by their shells is probably the easiest way to do that. So the terminology here is just the way that we name those scutes or plates that are on top of the shell. So turtle shells come in various shapes and sizes. So I am sharing my screen. I'm going to stop sharing just for a second. And can everybody see? Let's see. Can everybody see my screen or am I?
Yes, we
All
can
right,
see
cool.
you.
So yeah, so I'm holding a snapping turtle shell, and the shell can be oriented in different directions. And so it helps to know those terms in turtle shell anatomy in order to be able to correctly identify them in the field when you're using something like binoculars, or if you happen to come across one as you're walking and you look down and you maybe snap a photo of it. Um, the turtle shell on the outside of the bone is actually some little keratinized plates. So it's kind of like your fingernails on the outside. And so the scutes that you're observing are actually the outer covering under the over top of those bony plates. Okay. So now I'm going to go back into the share. So on those shells, if you've got the head and tail noted here, those scutes, you can start kind of numbering them based on the position relative to the head or the tail of the animal. If you only have a shell, you got to figure out which one is which, and that takes a little bit more identifying. But usually the animal, if it's alive, you'll be able to spot its head or its tail poking out a little bit. So the first scute is the cervical, which refers to the neck. And then there's a line of what are called the vertebrals that go straight down the longitudinal axis of the shell. The pleural scales are the ones kind of between those outer and the vertebral scales. So those are what we refer to as the pleurals. Pleural refers to the chest. And then we also have on the outer rim the marginal scutes. And so the marginal scutes, you know, some of these species might be identified by color patterns or by numbers of marginals, and that's what they're referred to. When you flip the turtle over, the other side of the shell has what's called the plastron. And so all of these little scutes correspond to positions on the plastron. And so we might name them based on their position relative to the head and tail, obviously. There's going to be a couple that I mentioned that are important for some of the hinging that takes place in the turtles. All right. So any questions before I move on? We're going to start looking at some of these species now and identifying them, and hopefully I'll be able to answer questions as we go with some of these identifications. All right. So I'll do these by turtle family, and so the groups that are within a family are all the species are going to be more closely related to each other than they are to the other families. So just kind of keep that in mind as we group them together. So our first family is Calidridae or Calidridae, and this member that we have is one that's very well known to people, which is the common snapping turtle, which is Chelydra serpentina. So this is one of our largest turtles. What is the largest turtle here that we have in the Commonwealth? And it is an important predator in many of the environments that it exists in, which are mostly totally aquatic, and they occasionally are semi-aquatic for parts of the year when they're nesting or traveling across land. So these animals, again, they spend most of their time underwater. Most of their lives are spent underwater, and reflected in that is some of the unique features of them. So even though they are armored reptiles, these turtles, their shells are not quite as covering as many of the other species. And part of that is because they are totally aquatic and they're pretty good at defending predators once they are in that aquatic environment. They are most vulnerable right after hatching. And I'll show you here in a second just why they're so vulnerable. So our record, here's our record snapping turtle with our state herpetologist, JD. He is holding this 18.3-inch massive turtle shell caught at Fort Pickett. You're seeing here at the bottom turtle mating behavior, which is really neat. So in the snapping turtles, males, I believe, are a little bigger than females. And so that's the male sort of on the back of the female there. And, you know, hanging on with his jaws to the turtle skin underneath. I said that their shells were not very well covering, and that really applies to that ventral or plastron part of their shell. So that's what this looks like. I kind of call it the turtle bikini. So the snapping turtles, for as fierce as they are and as armored as they are on top, when you flip them over, they have a very thin plastron. That is part because they spend all their time when they're underwater, they're swimming around a lot, but they're also on the surface of the bottom of the bottom of the water body, and they'll come up for air, they'll come up to feed, they'll come up to bask occasionally, and they'll come out of the water to mate and to lay their eggs. But otherwise, they spend most of their time as adults underwater. So they have this really thin plastron, and that allows them to have a lot of mobility for their limbs. So that's kind of an advantage to that, to having that kind of setup. So Kayla asked about what is a commercial snapping turtle fisherman and what do people do with the turtles they catch? So that's a good question. So snapping turtles are a species that is commercially, that you can commercially sell them and harvest them. And it's kind of like you know, people hunt for deer. This is an instance where you could actually hunt the turtle and you could actually sell them. And most of the snapping turtles is for meat and not for pets. So these are not really big in the pet trade right now, but they are a commercially they're a food item for some cultures and people. We were a few years ago, they started kind of keeping an eye on this. You know, before it was kind of like you could catch as many as you could fill in your truck or whatever. And now they're really trying to monitor it and regulate it a little bit more so that we don't over harvest. We want to keep the common snapping turtles common and we don't ever want them to be listed. So yes, snapping turtles are almost found in every county. On the maps that I show you, by the way, if there's ever a vacant county, it's probably because they simply haven't been reported, even though we think they occur there or know that they occur there. So they're all over Northern Virginia in every county. Some of the little dots are actually cities that they just don't have a record because somebody didn't report it yet. If you do live in one of the counties that has a vacant area and report it to the VHS or the DWR, it would be a county record for that county. Good, really good question. All right. So that's the only Calidridae type of turtle that we have. Actually, before I move on, I wanted to show you, so I'm going to try this. I'm going to try to toggle to my USB camera. I'm going to stop the screen share for a second. And so you should be able to see a black. So snapping turtle vulnerability. You saw how huge that turtle shell is. And it is hard to believe, but just trust me on this. That huge turtle starts out at that size. So this is a hatchling snapping turtle that was it was scavenged, which means it was found dead, and we kept it here in the Radford collection. But that huge turtle. This is the size they are when they hatch, and you can see just how vulnerable they are. This is easy pickings for many birds of prey. Great herons can eat these, and it's it's an unfortunate thing, but turtles tend to have really long lives, and it is thought that part of the reason is that because of that survivability, it just takes them a long time to get to reproductive age, and then when they do get there, they've got to reproduce the rest of their life for a very long time in order to replace the population. So if you've never seen a baby snapping turtle, that's the size of them. Yeah, so just a couple of centimeters long. And like I said, very vulnerable at that stage. So a quick question here: are there other turtles on the East Coast in the Collegiate? Not in Virginia. So we do have alligator snapping turtles, and those are found farther south. Jackie asks, I read that snapping turtles are passive in the water and aggressive on land. Any truth to this? I will tell you, they will bite you in the water. It's not that they won't bite you in the water. However, they feel a lot more secure in water than they do on land. When I train students how to handle these in the lab, that is the first thing I show them, is just how docile they are when you're trying to maneuver them in the water. As soon as you pull them out on the land, they feel very vulnerable. And you can, if you think about their plastron, that that really thin area of their on their ventral side, that they're very vulnerable at that time, right? When you have that plastron out. So they do thrash around a lot. They're not very pleasant. They make smells and sounds and everything else. So okay, so the next family is the Amididae. This is where most of our species come from in the Commonwealth. And most of the time when people think of turtles, this is what they're thinking about. So we have eastern painted turtles, spotted turtles, wood turtles, river cooters, northern red-bellied cooters, woodland box turtles, red-eared sliders, and yellow-bellied sliders in your area. So, and I'm referring to the dike marsh. These are all possible species that you would see. Again, I'm going to go through these, but you're not going to be able to go out tomorrow and identify every one based on what I tell you. And I do recommend heading over to the VHS website and spending some time, do some research, and spend some time thinking about what you're going to see and where you're going to see it. So our first species here is the eastern painted turtle. So these are relatively small turtles. They can be about the size of your hand and maybe a little bit larger. And they're relatively common locally. When you find them, there tend to be a few of them in that area. One of the ways that you identify these turtles is that so in addition to being relatively small in size, they have these bright red patterns along the margin. So there's really a bright red series of bands along those marginal scutes. You'll also notice on the head, so the head has two round or oval, two bars behind the eyes, and those are going to be specific to these painted turtles, which you would not necessarily find in some of the other species. The most commonly confused species with this one, and this is one that you really have to watch out for, is the red-eared slider. So red-eared sliders are from farther west, so they're not native to Virginia, but they've been introduced and naturalized. And so they do co-occur with our painted turtles. And the big difference between these two is that on the red-eared sliders, their namesake is that instead of having those bars, the longitudinal lines or the white dots on their heads, you're going to see a red patch or stripe right behind the eye. And that is one way that you tell the two apart. The other way that you can tell them apart is that the red-eared slider, the shell's going to be a little more domed. So the painted turtles are kind of compressed and the sliders are going to be a little bit more domed, and that kind of allows them to be a little bit easily distinguished when you're looking at them through something like binoculars. Otherwise, the carapace is going to be kind of dark, kind of a black color. And then the plastron, if you were to flip them over, if you do happen to see one up close, is going to be just a kind of a plain coloration on the painted turtles. All right. So again, this is just an image that's showing you the two, how to tell the two apart from each other. So the Eastern painted turtle, look for those lines and then the two round to oval dots behind the eye compared to a red stripe behind the eye. That's going to be your main distinguishing feature between the two. And then the shell, a little more domed in the slider and a little bit more compressed and flattened in the painted turtle. Both of these are super common. You can find painted turtles in the marsh, almost certain, and then go out to your nearest cattle field, and they love to just hang out with the cows in the ponds on those cattle farms. Spotted turtles are a species that does have some protections in the state. We've been monitoring these for quite some time, and these are ones that appear in the pet trade. So they do get harvested illegally because of their size. They're very small as adults, and they tend to show up in the pet trade and as sort of those status symbols. If you have a spotted turtle, you probably paid a lot of money for it. Spotted turtles, you can tell why they're named that way. They're easily distinguished by having a single spot per scute on their carapace. And that appears in both the juveniles and in the adult species. We have a lot of, we've done a lot of work to try to get halt in all commercial take of these spotted turtles in their wetlands. This is one that is being well studied, but because of its size and because it is valuable, it's kind of hard to, keep out poachers, prevent all poaching from this species. But we've passed a lot. I know the VHS has done resolutions to halt the take of these species until we find out more about them. Quick question: are red-eared sliders a threat to our eastern painted turtles? So yeah, going back to that, sorry I missed that question, but the sliders do definitely co-occur with eastern painted turtles, and they occupy the same habitat and eat very similar foods. So they would be competitors with painted turtles, and painted turtles seem to be doing okay despite that. And we've had sliders around for many decades. So, all right, another species of emydid turtles and this one is another one that has protections. This is the wood turtle. These are a more terrestrial type of turtle that you might find around the marsh. And these are listed as threatened under Virginia law. So wood turtles, if you look at their carapace, you can sort of see why they might have been named that way, sort of like their common name. And that's because it does look like carved wood. Their shells look like carved wood. Tend to have a fairly kind of a flat carapace, and the distinct pattern of that carapace is really the thing that you would, if you see one of these, you can really tell that you're looking at a wood turtle instead of something like a box turtle or a slider that we saw in the previous picture. So these are state listed. You cannot keep these as pets. If you see one for sale, report it, don't buy it. People are definitely keeping their eyes on populations of wood turtles. If you're interested in seeing one in person and you have time this weekend, the Virginia Herpetological Society will be at Sweet Run State Park doing a survey. So you might be able to see one if you head out to Sweet Run on Saturday. I'll talk more about that at the end. These have, in addition to being poached, they are also under the threat because of habitat loss and fragmentation. And yes, that image of their hatchlings is shown at the top left of the slide. And yes, that is a dime. So these are very tiny when they're first hatched. All right, Eastern river cooters. So these are fairly large species, obviously going to be tied to aquatic environments. And they can be hard to distinguish when you haven't spent a whole lot of time out in the field looking for them. So the Eastern river cooter, Pseudemys coccinea, is going to be again a larger species. I have a shell of one of these here in the lab, and I will try to show this to you. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second so you can see it in 3D. Start my video again and go to my FaceTime camera. This is the bigger camera. Okay, so I've got a shell of one of these here, just so you can kind of see the shape of this thing. So you've got a fairly nice dome to the shell, and the plastron is going to cover most of the ventral side of that organism. So the plastron size is actually fairly large compared to something like a snapping turtle. And if you look at that description, and I'll go back to that slide in a second, it talks about these C-shaped patterns on the plurals. And what they're talking about is on these plurals, you'll see that they have like a single little C-shaped pattern on each one of those. And that's, if you're looking at these through binoculars, you would see these basking, and they would probably be more than one of them. And that's how you would be able to determine this versus a slider or the other species of cooter or river cooter. You'd be able to actually look and see that little C shape. So a fairly large, conspicuous turtle, and one that you definitely would be able to see in the marsh, and hopefully be able to see it through binoculars. Seeing it with the naked eye is going to be hard. If you're out maybe on the water, you might get it close enough, but they're going to, they tend to dip into the water when they're disturbed. As juveniles, you can see they're very, their coloration is very bright. So they're actually pretty easy to see as juveniles, and distinguishing them from things like map turtles when they're juveniles is kind of hard. But the adults are fairly easy to determine from each other. I'm going to, for the sake of time, skip across a couple slides here. They are confused with the other species of river cooter. So we have northern red-bellied and eastern river cooters, and both of those can co-occur. And there are ways to distinguish them apart from each other. Obviously, you're not going to necessarily get to stare it in the face very closely. So looking at the actual mouth shape, probably not the best distinguishing feature for you all. However, if you want to tell that the eastern from the northern red-bellied cooter, if you're looking at it through binoculars, the easiest way to do that is going to be to look at that shell, and instead of a C shape on the plurals, you see these vertical bands. So if you can see that on the shell, there are, instead of a C, you have a vertical band or line across each of those plural scutes. And that's kind of just one of the easier way to distinguish them apart from each other. They're about the same size, and they would have very similar kind of habits. Hanging out on logs, you may even see the two species together on the same log if you're observing them. A fan favorite is going to be box turtles. So you'll see these usually by the water, or you'll see them way out in the far away from water, because they are very terrestrial. And box turtles are going to be one of our most widely traveling species in terms of their ability to migrate away from those riparian corridors. So they're not having to rely on water for transportation as much as the other species. And so they'll spend most of their time out of water. They will get in water. They're not averse to it. One of the cool things that's really, which you can see here with the box turtle plastron, or that ventral scale, is that there is a very large hinge. And so a lot of these turtles have that hinge where they can actually sort of bend their plastron to close up. But that allows these box turtles really to almost and completely close themselves into their shell. So you may come across just a shell sitting on the forest floor or maybe in your yard and not know that there's a turtle a live turtle in there, and that's because it's hiding and able to enclose itself in its shell for long periods of time. So I do, for my show and tell on this one, I do have a box turtle shell that was, again, this is a scavenged, it was found dead, and this is how it was preserved. And so you can actually see how it closes itself up there. So that little hinge allows that shell to close shut. That protects the entirety of the animal when it's in there. It takes a lot of time and effort for mammals to get into that shell when they are when they do happen to want to go after whatever's inside of it.
We
All
do
right.
have a question in the chat,
Yeah,
or a couple questions in the chat that have been added.
yeah. Let me go through. So a Reddit, okay, so is there science to explain the color patterns? Does heredity play into the amount of orange versus yellow, or the pattern? Yeah, the easy answer is I'm sure it does, but I don't actually know offhand what science, whether they've teased apart what genes control patterning. Color pattern is kind of challenging because it's not just the genes, but when and how they are expressed. And so you could have the gene for a certain color, but it's actually how that gene is regulated as the organism is developing and the pattern comes about. But I don't know, especially for turtles, that anybody's really looked into the development of those patterns. But that's a great question and probably one worth asking. Next question was, I saw a turtle in Dyke Marsh with a shell that was twice as long as the record snapping turtle that you show, a solid 3 foot long shell. It was not a snapper, looked more like an enormous painted turtle, but lighter green and much larger head, neck, and legs. Do you have an idea of what it was? A 3 foot shell would be almost, I can't think of any native species that has anywhere close to that big of a shell, especially to Virginia. There are some large soft shell turtles, not that big, and they are not in our part of the state. And actually, the big ones don't even occur here in the U.S. If you get a picture of it, I'll believe it. And you should actually submit it if you ever come across it and have any pictures. I would love to see those when people find weird things. Especially something like that would be that would be probably an invasive species, or who knows. But 3 feet would be, that would actually be kind of a, I I I, I would love to see a picture of it if you get a chance. All right, the yellow-bellied slider. I've showed you the red-eared slider, so you can see why this one's called the yellow-bellied slider. So these are a little smaller than our cooters, the eastern and the northern, and they're going to have those really bright stripes on their legs, and that's similar to the red-eared slider. The difference is that they don't have that red stripe behind their eye, and they're going to be, like I said, pretty similar in size, usually pretty brightly colored though. And these you can spot them pretty easily with binoculars if you know what you're looking for. They differ from those two cooters. You don't see the C shape on the shell. They do have a vertical kind of line on each pleural scute, but those lines are yellow and not kind of that red, the color that we saw with in the previous, let's see, previous one here. I think I did skip over the red-eared slider. So this is the one that's invasive, or I should say introduced and naturalized. And the two of these two sliders, again, they're very easy to confuse, especially if the head's kind of tucked into the shell. But once you get used to it, once you get used to identifying them, you get pretty good at telling the two of them apart. All right. I'm gonna skip over that. So here's some really cool turtles, ones that are not very well known. So most of those turtles, I bet if you go out to the marsh on a sunny day, you will see them and be able to identify them. It could be really fun to do. Ones that you probably won't see, but are really cool species are in the family Kynosternidae. So kyno means like kinetic or movement, and sternidae refers to the sternum. And so we have the southeastern mud turtle and the eastern musk turtle, which are going to have those very highly hinged plastrons. And in the case of the mud turtle, we not only have one hinge, but we have a second hinge in the shell. And so that second hinge allows them, again, they can completely close themselves up when they are trying to close their shell up, in the face of predators. Whoops, sorry about that. The way that you tell them apart, so both of these turtles are very small. They both have very small and relatively domed shells, and they both live in mud. So both of these turtles, to identify them apart, one of the ways that you can do that is if you happen to have it in your hand, maybe you see one crossing the road and you want to see whether it's a musk or a mud turtle. Look for the hinges. So again, if you have a double hinge and it's closed up from both of those, it's probably a mud turtle. And then look at that pectoral scute shape. So on the mud turtle, we have a triangular shaped pectoral scute. And on the eastern musk turtle, we have a more rectangular or polygonal type of scute. So they're very small, both have highly domed carapaces, and they're very hard to distinguish. The southeastern mud turtle shown here. So it kind of looks like a mini version of a snapping turtle, but this is an adult. This is the relative size of that turtle. And again, has the double hinge on its plastron. The shell is going to be kind of an olive color, and you will, unless you see them crossing a road or you happen to be at the right place at the right time, they are pretty secretive and will spend most of their time underwater. The stink pot, called the eastern musk turtle, Sternothrus odoratus, another small turtle, kind of has an olivish type of shell, highly domed. Again, look at the plastron and you'll see that there's a single hinge and that pectoral scute has more of a square or polygon type of shape to it. The other thing is, if you look at the plastron, you'll notice here on the musk turtle, we got a lot more space happening here. So it's kind of got this almost like a gap between the scutes that we did not have with the mud turtle. So I'm going to toggle back to the mud turtle. Very little space in between the scutes on this species, even though we have the two hinges. On the musk turtle, we have a lot of space in between the scutes on the plastron. And that's one way to tell them when you're able to like flip them over and see that part of the animal. If you're lucky enough to see the heads definitely have differences that you can see. Really cool thing about this species, and it's worth mentioning, recently there was a study that was done in a group in Austria that looked at the stink pots, and they found that they can spend literally months underwater without going up for air, and they're doing that, they think, by breathing through their tongue. So they have an adapted tongue that allows them to actually do gas exchange while they're completely submerged for months and months. So kind of a cool species. Both of these are very cool, and both of these can fit in the palm of your hand, that they're so small. Okay, so you asked about the giant, possibly 3-footer. This is the soft shell turtle I mentioned a couple slides ago. So we had the question about, I think you saw a giant turtle, look kind of like a painted turtle. This is the one that I would imagine you saw. I'm not positive about that. I would have to really see the picture of it. Does it look like what you saw? Not the one. Okay, I'm sorry. These can get pretty big though, and I think they can get fairly large. I've never seen one in person. I've seen our native soft shell turtle, out in Southwest Virginia, but not the Chinese. All right, how can we protect them? I said we get around to what can we do? So one of those things is going to be create and maintain natural habitats. When I say create, that can be creating it in your own backyard, and that's great. But it also means supporting organizations that are invested in conservation. So the Department of Wildlife Resources, the Department of Conservation and Recreation both do a good job of trying to protect habitat in the state. And there's also nonprofits that that support turtle, both turtle rehabilitation as well as maintaining turtle habitats. So I encourage you to do your research, get involved, and when the time comes, you may need to get out there and do some digging. In the event of turtles that are out in their habitat, please leave them alone. Please observe them though. I do encourage you to take some of the skills that you're going to learn as you're trying to go out and find these things and identify them. Use that, please identify them, report. Maybe there's turtles that aren't reported from counties. Please do go out and learn how to ID them, but don't move them unless they absolutely need medical assistance or if you're helping them get across the road so they're not smushed by a car. And then the third thing is really to educate other people about the value of turtles. They're not just commercial food animals. They're not just trinkets, but they actually serve a purpose for the ecology of the, for supporting the ecology of their environment and maintaining not just food webs, but also maintaining the abiotic parts of the habitat that they're in. Ways that you can get involved. The Virginia Herp Society is a great entry-level way to get involved. And we're happy to invite people who are total novices into the organization. All right, where can we report turtle sightings? I'm going to show you the website and we're going to get to that in a second. And yeah, this is really really meant to be an introduction to some of these. I picture people going out to visit the marsh, being super interested and maybe seeing these things out and about, but not really knowing how to identify them or what you're seeing. And that's where I think get yourself a good pair of binoculars. I personally like an 8x25, one that's meant for like short distance. I don't need, ones that are for long distance. Birding binoculars are great, and just get out there and spend some time identifying them. So really quick, I just want to, I know that I'm over on time or running super out of time. I want to take you to the VHS website. I just want to show you some features, and then and then we'll depart from there. So the Virginia Herpetological Society has a really great website. It's one of the features of the organization that attracted me to it when I first joined back in 2014. And it allows you to kind of go through, and you can go through to the animal tab and look up all of these species of turtles that we mentioned tonight that you find in Dyke Marsh. But you can find species, let's say that you're coming out to my part, I live in Radford, and you want to see what species you're going to find. You could actually go through and check out really cool facts about their biology and also ways to identify them, and maybe find out some new information that you didn't know. So that's on the VHS website and under the animals tab. There's turtle ID guides there. So you click on the ID guide, it gives you a little quiz at the end. So a great way to kind of get started in learning about these critters. And then there's also a way to generate a species and counties list. So let's say that you don't live in Albemarle County, but you want to go to Albemarle County and you don't know what species you're going to find there. You can go through and you can go through and use this database gateway to generate the list of species. And since this is a turtle talk, if I went to Albemarle County, I'd be able to find about 7 or 8 species that are here listed, and all of these are clickable links that you can go to find out a little bit about the biology. So one of the best tools on the website, in my opinion, is this VHS database gateway under the animals tab. Education is obviously a really important part of what we do. So we have educational committees, we have conservation committees. And if you ever are in question about, you find an animal and you want to know what to do about it, we do have an ID line for getting information about animals. I'm trying to take you to the spot where that is. I thought it was on the education page, but let's go back to my animals. In terms of reporting, you can definitely send these to us if you have a question about an animal. There is no there's no like requirement that you're a scientist to be able to report something, and I highly recommend reaching out. Send us the information for the animal, and we can kind of tell you, like, is it found in that county? Is it a species of concern? And if you're having trouble finding a wildlife rehabber, sometimes we can help in reaching out to that. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble finding my ID hotline. There it is right there. It's on the it's on the main page. So it's ID at virginiaherpetologicalsociety.com. That's what you're going to email. I'm going to put it in the chat just so people have easy access to it. And you can definitely send that. That is one of our hottest parts of the website. We get hundreds of those reports every year. People just asking questions. It's most of the time about snakes, but sometimes it's about turtles. And if you are interested in okay, sorry, I wasn't sharing my screen there. If you are interested in stuff besides turtles, we're happy to help generate that. Sorry about that. I didn't realize I wasn't sharing my screen. I was just doing all that interesting stuff about the website. But it's vaherpsociety.com or virginiaherpetologicalsociety.com. Either of those will work for you. And that ID link is the one that you can use to navigate, or to that email address is what you can send to our ID team to get the information on the species you're kind of curious about. All right. All right, last question. Let's see. Yeah, sorry about sorry about not screen sharing. I was overly excited about the website there and not paying attention to what I was doing. So any turtle identification for one having a star-shaped iris. That was a large long-necked turtle, so well camouflaged that I thought its head and neck was a large branch underwater. So Samuel, was this at the marsh, or is this near, do you know where you found that turtle? Okay, so it was in the marsh. Okay. Star-shaped iris. That's not a feature that I'm honestly that familiar with. But a long neck, the longest necks, if this is a large turtle with a really long neck, it would be a snapping turtle. If it's a smaller turtle with a long neck, it could be a number of different species. But if it was underwater, that part of it might tell you a little bit about which one it might be. Was it underwater, or like completely submerged, or was it actually like kind of just hanging out on the top of the water? Okay, so completely submerged. That's a tough one. I think, it's hard to know without an actual image or a video. But the star-shaped iris, that is not a feature that I'm totally familiar with.
I just jumped and it took like 10 or 15 seconds.
Oh, okay.
I kind of like my way better because I'm getting tastes of the lights.
Yeah, the snapping, I will say the snapping turtle, I'm gonna go try this one more time. So if you look at the snapping turtle eye, can you guys see this in the picture? So it does kind of have a interesting pattern to its iris. I would not call it star shaped, but it does have these bars, and it definitely has a kind of a, and they have a super long neck when it's actually like extended. So maybe it was. It's hard to tell. No, it was not. Okay. Um, that's a tough one. Sorry. Well, I'm way over on time. I really appreciate y'all sticking around. If you do have any other questions, I'm happy to stick around for a little longer if you want and answer them. And then you can always email either the ID group, and I'm putting my email address here in the chat for those people who want to email me directly. I can also answer some questions. I'm an anatomist by trade. I study reptile anatomy and amphibian anatomy. So some of the ecology questions, I can refer you to people who study this stuff as a part of their trade. But yes, I think it seems like dike marsh needs some protection, and ways to do that. I actually talked to Deborah. Was it Deborah or Glenda? I was talking. I guess it was Glenda.
Glenda.
We talked about possibly, the VHS. We can do species inventories. So if we can figure out a way, I believe you said that dike marsh was on federal land. And so if we can get the permits to come on and do species inventories there, we could at least document what's there kind of as a starting point. And then, conservation groups could be approached for habitat management. You are under you'd be in the northern region for habitat management guidelines. And so there are actually like specifics that are written out for how to maintain those marsh habitats for different species that would be worth looking at once you know what's there. And oh, Carolyn, oh, great question. Yeah. Terrapin, turtle, and tortoise. Oh, goodness. Tortoises are in their own, so all the tortoises are related to each other, and they are all land dwelling species. We do have some tortoises here in North America, but not in Virginia. The turtle and terrapin distinction, I'm not as familiar with that. You may know more than that, more than me about that. It used to be, things like, do they live in freshwater versus saltwater? Are they marsh species? Yes, terrapins definitely play sports in Maryland. So yeah, so that namesake is the diamondback terrapin, which is that's a species on the eastern shore. You can find them here, actually in coastal Virginia. And that's probably where they got their name from, I would imagine. But yeah, turtle, terrapin, tortoise, it's kind of all those are kind of common names. I will say that the one that makes the most sense out of those is the tortoise, simply because all of the tortoises are definitely all related to one another, whereas the terrapins and turtles, it's kind of like, they're kind of punctated, in terms of how they're related to each other.
This is Glenda. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey, Glenda.
Hi. Let me just say that this was very, very informative, and we really appreciate it. And it inspires me to go out and learn more about what we have. So I would like to follow up with you about a potential survey. And we actually did a herpetology survey. It's probably been 10 years ago, and it was terrific. And Caroline helped us. Anyway, thank you very, very much. I think it's almost 8:30, and we probably should wind this up. And some of us could probably talk into the night, but this was great. So Thank you, everybody. Thanks for attending, and we'll see you soon in Dyke Marsh.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.